Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Rob Tatum, and I gratefully serve as president of the Boise River Enhancement Network. This is one of a series of Riverside chats that the Enhancement Network does throughout the year. We're so pleased today to be with Chris Panagos, who will be talking to us about women in fly fishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. As Rob said, my name is Christine Panagos, and a little bit while back, Rob asked me to give a talk on fly fishing, and I am by no means any expert, but he said I was very enthusiastic about it and thought I had a lot to share with others, and hopefully the enthusiasm and passion for what I do hopefully I can share it. So again, I'm Chris. I am married to my husband, wonderful husband, Ash, and mother to our crazy, out of control cattle dog, Cash. I've been a physical therapist for the last 33 years. I'm an avid cyclist, fly fisher person, and a fly tire. I am originally from Southern New Hampshire, and I went to college in Boston, and then I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I've been in Boise, Idaho since 2017, and I've fished in almost all of those places. My early years of fishing were pretty much with my father, and my father learned all of his skills from his father, Christos Panagos. He was a gentleman that came over from Greece in the 1930s and had little to nothing. And so he sustained his family through fishing, baking, and bootlegging. Apparently he made some great ouzo. My father was an avid lake fisherman, and he would fish for lake trout and landlocked salmon in the lakes of Southern New Hampshire. He created and tied his own flies, and some of my earliest memories were just standing on a stool trying to look over my father's shoulder and see what kind of flies he was tying and creating. And I still have that same stool that I stood on then, and I rest my feet on it now underneath my fly tying table as I'm tying my flies. My dad was one of the first members and founding members of the New Hampshire chapter of Trout Unlimited, which is an exceptional organization. I still have a fly rod that my father was gifted from Trout Unlimited. It's a 9-foot, 7-weight Orvis bamboo fly rod that is still registered with Orvis in his name. So I bring that out from time to time on special occasions. He was a year-round fisherman, which means that we were out on the ice with an auger, drilling through 3 feet of ice on Lake Winnipesaukee and Squam and Winnisquam, trying to catch just about anything. And his summer job, he was a school teacher during the year, but his summer job was with the Marine Patrol for the New Hampshire Department of Safety. And so with this job, he and I would go out in the spring and fall together. And I enjoyed this so much. And we would place the buoys in the lakes around Southern New Hampshire, and those buoys would mark the rocky outcroppings in the shallow areas for the boaters and recreationalists in some of these lakes. And so the result of that is, from a very young age, I knew where the rocky and gravel structures were in many of the lakes that I would later go out and fish with my dad. And so I went off to college. And as soon as I graduated from college, my father retired from teaching. And there were days that he would just call me at 5:30 in the morning and say, "Don't go to work, play hooky today, let's go fishing." And as a favor to my mother, I would get my father out of the house all day. So we would do crazy things, like we would go out to Lake Winnipesaukee once the ice had receded from Alton Bay, and we would troll along the perimeter of the ice with our fly rods, hoping to catch some landlocked salmon. And those were some of the coldest experiences of my life, but also some of the best and most memorable. We went up to one particular day. I remember we went up to Dublin Lake in Dublin, New Hampshire, which is the home of Yankee Magazine. And it's as quaint as the magazine. And I recall catching countless numbers and releasing countless numbers of beautiful 12, 14-inch brook trout, which today they're still my favorite trout. And so again, a special shout out to my boss at the time, Carol Angus, for giving me those days off without too much pushback. And then I moved to Portland, Oregon. And when I was in Portland, I didn't fish, and I was there for 21 years and I missed it. But I think I think back to some of the barriers that limited me from fishing in Portland was I didn't know the waters. I didn't know the rivers. I didn't know the lakes. I didn't know the rocky structures. I didn't know what to use. I was on the West Coast. And my wonderful, very supportive father was usually there always to take the fish off the hook for me. So I was a little nervous about harming the fish and not being able to get them off the hook. So I took up other hobbies like mountaineering and cycling. And I was on my way here this morning and I was thinking about the connection because I no longer mountaineer, and then I've kind of replaced all of that with fly fishing. And I realized that when I'm out on the river and when I'm out on the river year round, I look at it differently. And standing out in the middle of the river, you get this connection with the river. And that's kind of the same way I felt when I was doing all the mountaineering that I was doing in the Pacific Northwest. Once you've walked around or hiked some of the trails or even summited some of these beautiful peaks in the Pacific Northwest, you never look at that peak the same way again. You have a connection to it. It has given you strength. It has almost knocked you down, but you have been able to gain strength from your time and experience on it. And that's the way I feel about the rivers out here. And then I moved to Boise, Idaho. And I swore to myself when I got to Boise in 2017 that I am in the fly fishing mecca of the US, one of them, one of the best meccas, and that I was going to get myself back into fly fishing with this beautiful river that we have running straight through town, and that I was also going to get involved in fly tying. And so that's what I did, and that's how I got here today. And so that brings us to the topic of our conversation today, women in fly fishing. And so I found this great article by Jonathan Wright in Fly Fisherman Magazine. And he stated in a 2022 article in which he interviewed many fly fishing guides and took a lot of polls. He said that women make up 30% of all fly fisher people currently. And that's astounding to me. That's 1 in 3 people out fly fishing is a woman. We are the fastest growing demographic in fly fishing, which is great for us because we're getting better fitting equipment, waders, boots, and gear. And yeah, we are profitable. So women were more coachable and more open to suggestions, more open to making mistakes and learning from them. They said that when it came to wading, it was like, the women are more like the yoga and the Tai Chi masters, where the men were more like football and rugby and sumo wrestlers out there. So just much more graceful in the water, not just clomping through the river and whatnot. Our casting, we were more delicate and less power. So we used our bodies, body mechanics. I'm a physical therapist. We were more in tune with how to get our fly in a different location without using the power that, we don't have the same upper bodies. Some of us don't have the same upper body strength. And so that was really interesting that he said that, and that we'll talk about a woman, a very famous woman in fly fishing who is just a remarkable caster, and she still lives today, and she's won many world championships with her accuracy and distance. So handling the fish, women are more receptive to catch and release than men, and we tend to cradle the fish more like a baby, very gently, versus men who tend to just grab that fish by the lip, hold it up, and hold it up like a trophy. We're more protective of the environment. We're more quiet and clean. We just have a softer impact on the environment. And we clean up after ourselves and others, and we notice what others have left behind, which was, again, these aren't my words. These are the guides that said a lot of this. And again, we trend towards being more patient, better listeners, multitaskers, and organized. We don't forget things when we go out on the water. And again, not my words. I'm not saying negative things about the guys. I love fishing with the guys. So as I mentioned earlier, there were a number of barriers for myself for getting started with fly fishing. I was scared. I didn't, my dad did everything, and we did a little bit of fly fishing back in New England, but not as much. What is a floating line? What is a sinking line? What is tippet? What's 5X, 2X? Why are the fish hooks smaller when the number is higher? And why is the fishing line thicker when the number is smaller? It just didn't make sense. So I was personally a little bit intimidated, and I think that can be intimidating for a lot of people. So there's so much information. There's so much gear and equipment. Sometimes that's not a barrier if you love the gear and like to get the gear. So the water's cold, the weather's cold. The dangers of waiting. It's scary out there. There's not a lot of us, and some of those currents can really sneak up on you and just take your feet right out from underneath you. And dangers of hooking yourself. I put that on there because it was one of my dangers. I didn't have dad to take the fish off the hook for me. And what I didn't put in here was a picture of a hook sunk very deep in my finger. But the good thing is that it was a barbless hook, and it came out fairly easily. So where to begin? So specific to here, to Boise Idaho. And again, I have no interest in, I love these shops, but they're not doing anything for me right now. So the two shops that I really had great success with was Idaho Angler up on Vista, and Anglers Boise out on Overland. And so they offered classes. They still offer classes, just Fly Fishing 101. They offer fly tying classes. Some of those classes are women only. There's always there's always a bottle of wine or two. So they're very social, but you learn a lot. The guys and gals at these shops are so helpful. And I never felt like I asked any question was going to get a snicker or a laugh, because I think they also started off at the same place at one point at all. They all have private instruction, and they both offer guides. So in some of their basic Fly Fishing 101 classes, they'll cover things like, of course, casting technique, casting style, kind of the dynamics of casting. They'll go briefly into how to read the water, meaning where are the currents the fastest? Where are they the slowest? Where would the fish be sitting? They'll teach you a little bit about that. Fish biology and behavior. Fish are lazy. They're going to hide behind structures. They're going to be down low where the current is less, except I won't go into all of that. That's a whole other lecture. But they'll talk about entomology, which is fascinating. Aquatic insects and the different stages of them, how they respond to temperature, time of day, time of year. That is also fascinating. How are you going to decide to put what fly to put on your line? And after these courses, I spent numerous weekends trying to get some of my friends' kids to go out to the Boise River with me, so I didn't look like a fool, this middle-aged woman out there flipping rocks with a little net. But yeah, it was fascinating. And then trying to identify those bugs and what stage they were at. Equipment. Knots are intimidating, but not if you're sitting on your sofa watching television with a piece of rope and practicing your knots, and then practicing on fishing line later out on the river. And then, of course, they take you outdoors and give you some equipment and have you cast and try to hit the pie plate and things like that. So it's fun. All right. The other thing that was great is just getting online. Orvis, the fly fishing company, does a great job with this series for beginner fly fishing. Everything, reading the water, everything you could possibly imagine. Tippet size, hook size, whatever. Just basic stuff that you might want to address before you head out to the fly fishing shops, so you don't feel so embarrassed for asking such basic questions. So they do a remarkable job, and there are so many outfits out there online that do a great job teaching. So different YouTube channels, social media groups. I'm not on social media, but there are so many, and I go into a little bit more detail in the next slide. There are fly fishing, women's only fly fishing groups here in Boise that connect through social media or not. They have websites, so that can help you out a little bit. Local fly fishing shops. My sense is, as a woman, when I walk into a fly fishing shop, everybody's there to help me. I never have to wait for somebody to help me. So again, all the guys and gals at the fly fishing shops have been incredibly supportive and helpful. And then reading. I have just a stack of books. I just love reading from some of the older information that's out there, some of the newer information on Euro nymphing. I just love taking it all in. But again, none of it is a substitute for actually getting out there and just tangling your line, making a total fool of yourself, never catching a fish, all those good things. So educate yourself, buy some gear, take a class, and then buy some more gear. Go practice casting at the park or in your backyard. It's fun, and just tie a piece of yarn off to your fly line, and it's amazing how many people will come over to you and say that they want to try to fly fish someday, and you say, yeah, I'm trying to fly fish, but it's an ongoing learning process. Make sure you purchase your license. More trips to the fly shops, make a friend with everybody at the fly shops. Get your feet wet and realize how much more gear you might or may not still need. And I just want to say that, and I'm proud of this, I was out there on the river. We're trying so hard, casting and casting, 5 more casts, late for dinner. It was 8 months here in Idaho before I caught my first trout. And I could have gotten angry about that, or upset or frustrated, but that's not why I was out in the river. And I think what fly fishing people say when they don't catch anything was, I saw 3 bald eagles today. I saw some deer. Oh, it was so beautiful. Things were blooming. Oh, there was a mayfly hatch. That means, no, I didn't catch anything, but I still connected with nature and with the river. So, all right. When I was talking to Rob a couple months ago, I told him that he told me he hadn't been out fishing for a little while. Had more to do with a house remodel, I think. But and I said, oh, I'm still going. I want to catch a fish every month this year. I want to catch 1 fish a month. And so the reason why I did that is because it sounds a little crazy, and I like to do crazy things sometimes, but it got me outside in all kinds of weather. Living in the Pacific Northwest, I realized if you wait for it to stop raining, you're waiting a long time. And if I wanted to wait to go fishing, I was going to be waiting a long time. And I didn't want to do that. As I was talking about earlier, getting out there year round allows me to see all the changes in the river that occur every season. So I get to see where the sandbars are, where the rocks are, where that structure is, where the fish will be hiding in the spring when I go out fishing again. Yeah, see where the fish are, learn the structure of the river. Again, you do see a variety of wildlife. American eagles, bald eagles, things that I don't even know what they were. You just see all the stages of wildlife through the changes in the season. Fewer people out in the river. There's nothing like being out on the river when it's just lightly snowing outside. And yes, it might be a little bit cold, but the water temperature isn't as cold as the external temperature. So really, for me, the things that would get cold would be my hands, and I would fish until I couldn't. I didn't have the dexterity to tie on a fly or anything. And it's only really, really cold if you catch a fish and your hands get wet. So pros and cons for not catching a fish. And yeah, why not? You just bundle up, and yeah, I love fishing in the winter. And then you have to find your community. So I fish with two gals, and both of their names are Emily. And so it got really confusing to say I was going fishing with Emily. My husband would say, which one, which one? And so one day I was on Instagram and I saw a picture of Freddie the osprey, and Freddie had two huge brown trout, one in each of his talons. And I sent that video to my friend and I said, from now on, when I'm on the river, I want you to call me Osprey. And then she got back to me and she said, call me Dragon. It's from a movie, one of her favorite movies. And then my other friend, Emily, is just a little too cool to go along with this. So we named her Scud. And so it's Dragon and Scud. Those are my fishing buddies. And it works. And I'm just trying to forward. There we go. And so every time I'm out in the river, I just come back so much happier, relaxed. Literally, my husband does not fish, but he pushes me out the door. He encourages me to fish. He's taken days off from work when I know I'm going to be gone for 6, 10, 12 hours so that the dog isn't home alone all day. But all of these photos here, Scud, Dragon, and myself, and all of these are taken within a few minutes of Boise. And so that beautiful brown trout on the bottom that's smiling, that's taken right in town here on the Boise River this past winter. Yeah, and they all are. So there are some just beautiful fish out there. And I remember each and every one of those days separately because they were all extremely special days on the river. So here in Boise or Idaho specifically, here are some of the fly fishing organizations specific to women. And I'm not part of any of these. I'm more of an introvert. But I have friends who fish in some of these organizations. So the interesting thing I came across in doing some research, there's a magazine called Done Magazine, which is magazine specific for women in fly fishing. And so it talks more about women's equipment and what companies are doing more to cater to women's waders. They do need to be different than men's waders and things like that. Casting for Recovery, Shauna Williams is a local physician. She started this group to support breast cancer survivors, which is fascinating. And there are women fly tying groups. I know that one specifically is up at Idaho Anglers. And I remember my fly tying class was the night after they had met, and the wine bottles would be lined up on the counter afterwards. So I never tied with them, but it's a lot of fun from what I understand. And there's never a dull moment out in the river, like with your girlfriends. It's great. So history of women in fly fishing. Yeah, probably Scotland or England, or it's kind of the origins and roots. So some of the very earliest names that I came across was a woman by the name Juliana Berners, and she was born into a well-to-do family, and she was a nun. And from what I read is back in this time, you had to earn your right to have access and to fish these rivers. A lot of the properties were owned by royalty or the wealthy. And so you had to earn your right to be on these rivers. And so initially, Juliana wrote a book on hawking. She was a wildlife enthusiast. And then she went on to write a very famous paper on fly fishing. And one of the things that she discussed in this paper were how to make hooks and the different types of materials that you could use to create flies. And that's back in the 1300s. So that's just remarkable to me. And really, there was a time when men and women did go out fly fishing together. The next name I came across was Maria Ustison, and she was the daughter, as are a lot of these famous women, she's the daughter of a famous rod maker or fly fishing company. And her father was the rod maker for King George IV. And as you can see up on that reel up there, it has the stamp of King George IV. He went on to, when he passed away, he left his company to his daughter, and his daughter was the person who did all the repairs, but she also made fly rods for Queen Victoria in the mid 1800s. So the mother to the Queen Mother. So all the way back then. And then we had Sarah J. McBride, which this is where it gets fun and interesting for me. She was the daughter of a famous angler and fly tyer, John McBride. And after she graduated from college, she didn't go off and get married and conform as most other women did. She stayed at home in Caledonia, New York, and she studied the creek that was in her backyard. She would see fly fishermen wander down from the bar, and at different times of day, they were using different types of bait or flies on their rods. And so she was very curious as to why this was happening. And so she is credited as being one of the first self-taught entomologists, which is someone who studies bugs in America. She would watch and see what they were doing. And then she became even more curious. So she would go down to the river and she would take the temperature of the river and determine which bugs were hatching at what water temperatures. And so she went on to kind of document all of her findings. And she published the first American paper on aquatic insects beside a singing stream. And yeah, that was the first paper way back in the 1800s on American entomology. Up until then, it was more about what they were doing over in England and Scotland and Ireland. So she's also credited as being one of the first American female fly tyers as well. And because she was so passionate about this, her father sent her over to England to study under some great fly tyers, and then she came home and kind of revolutionized fly tying. So she went from these attractor patterns, and a attractor pattern, for those of you that don't know, is a pattern of a fly that doesn't really mimic anything in nature. It's just out there and it's floating on the water, or it's in the water, and it's just irritating the fish enough that they get a little territorial and they attack it, they eat it. So she went into more of a natural fly pattern, which is something that actually mimics the bug or the insect that's on the water at whatever stage it's in. And then Elizabeth Benjamin in the 1850s, again from the East Coast. She was one of the first people, again, who took it that next step and developed more natural patterns of flies. So studying what they were, the different stages, the different phases of the flies, and then she would imitate them with her flies. And then we get into the big heavies. So we have Mary Orvis Marbury, born in 1956, and she was the daughter of the famous Charles Orvis of Manchester, Vermont. She also had two brothers. But when Mary graduated from high school, she was very passionate about tying flies. And so she was so passionate about it, she was so good at it. Her father brought somebody in, John Haley from New York, to mentor her. And from there, she went on to quickly manage the fly tying division at Orvis. And then it grew so big, she had to advertise in local papers. And she recruited a team of anywhere, depending on what time of year it was, 5 to 10 women. And these women would just sit and tie flies all day. And so she was getting requests from all over the United States for these different flies, but she was realizing that the flies that she was getting requests for was nothing that she was familiar with, even though the insects were all pretty much the same for the most part, East and West Coast. And so American entomology was far behind what they were doing over in Europe. But they were tying about 400 different flies. And then Mary is really credited with standardizing the flies for the waters and the rivers here in the United States, according to the geographic locations. And then in 1892, she published Famous Flies and Their Histories, and it is still in publication. If you own a very old copy of it, it's worth a lot of money, but she really standardized flies that we use here in the United States so that we're kind of referring to them all by the same names. And then last but not least, probably one of the most famous American women in fly fishing, Joan Wolfe. Again, born in the early 1920s. Her father also owned a rod and a gun shop. And when she was 10, she started to go fishing with her dad. And her dad saw that she was really good at casting. I heard, but I couldn't read anywhere. Somebody had told me that she was a dancer, and she wasn't big. She was about 5'4", 5'5", but she was very athletic and she knew how to use her body. And so she started competing at a young age, and she kept winning. And she kept winning women's categories, and then she kept winning and winning 21 national championships. And then she actually won a championship with a long distance cast of 136 feet and against male competitors at that time. So that just really humbled men. They just kind of bowed in her presence. She turned professional in 1952. She finished her career with a record-breaking cast of 161 feet. At about the end of that time, she met and married her famous angler husband, Lee Wolfe. He photographed her a lot. They traveled all over the world together, fishing in remote places. And they went on to find and open the Joan and Lee Wolfe School of Fly Fishing in 79. And it still exists today. And she's still there teaching. And an amazing teacher. And she's written a number of books, and I have a couple of them at home, and I've read lots of books on casting and fly fishing techniques and styles, and I find her book to be so comprehensive, so not overly detailed, but so just through her descriptions, I found that kinematically it really speaks to me, and it really it's one of the best fly casting books that I've come across. So that's Joan Wolfe. And then I tried to look for a local hero. And I came across Caitlin Barnhart. And she is a writer and a social worker up in northern Idaho. And she works with high-risk children. She is the co-founder of the national organization of the Mayfly Project. And this is an organization that mentors and teaches and equips foster children with fly tying material. So they are mentored for a year. They get to keep all the equipment that they've been issued. And she has gone on and researched just the impact that being out in nature and connecting with nature and the calming effect and what it has on these children. And so for that, I think that Caitlin, who's still in practice, is our local hero. Not to say that there aren't others, but I think that is very, very commendable. All right, so what is the future of women fly fishing? We're gonna take over the world? No, but there are more and more amazing female fly fishing guides out there. More and more women's only classes, camps and trips. There's women's specific gear. I don't know how many different sizes and shapes Orvis has, but they have one that'll fit. They have petite fly fishing waders, which I really appreciate. And hopefully it won't be, here, I won't be here saying my dad taught me everything. Hopefully people will get up here and say, my mom and dad, my mom could outfish my dad. My mom taught me everything about fly fishing. And yeah, hopefully that's the future of women in fly fishing, and back to the banks of the Merrimack River. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Christine. That was extraordinary.
Thank you.
Not just nuts and bolts, but also passion that you shared with us.
Thank you.
What a treat. Are there questions from people here in the audience or folks who are online?
I have a question. I'm online. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right, great. My name is Tamsin Bingley, and the question I have is whether, and maybe this is really obvious to people who fish, so I apologize, but is there a difference in the type of hook that is used in fly fishing versus regular fishing? And the reason why I ask is I went on a fishing trip just this past weekend with my husband. He loves to fish with his buddies, and I swear every single other fish they caught, the fish would swallow the hook, and it ended up killing, most of the time killing the fish. And that bothered me. I'm okay with fishing if I'm gonna like eat the fish or release the fish, but just the level of death that was occurring in this fishing trip was really bothered me. And I would love to find a way to have less of an impact on fish.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if fly fishing was kind of that way just already.
Yeah, that is a great question. And so, yeah, when for fly fishing, it is a requirement on many of the rivers around here, and all over the country, that those hooks be single hooks and barbless hooks. So there's no little bump on that hook. So that if that fish, and they are way smarter than us, that fish can kind of back out of that hook quite easily. And so it's important that we keep tension on the line. That's what they say, keep the rod tip up and keep your line tight. So yeah, a single hook, and it's not supposed to have a barb on it, which is nice when you have to go and take your fish off the hook. I don't know, one of the things that I try to do is I try to set that hook right away. As soon as I feel it, as soon as I feel the end of my fly rod, which they're very sensitive, as soon as I feel a little vibration on that, I set the hook right away. Or as soon as my indicator moves down just a little bit, I set the hook right away so that fish doesn't have an opportunity to swallow the hook.
So does that mean you pulled back on the rod? Is that what the setting the hook?
Yeah, I set the hook. Yep, I put tension on it very quickly, so it sets the hook in the fish's lip, hopefully, before it has a chance to ingest the hook.
Okay.
And thank you for being so sensitive. I am also very sensitive. I don't even like to take the fish out of the water.
I appreciate that. I
Yes.
just, and maybe this is one of the things about women that is different than men, but
Exactly.
it bothered me. I
Yeah.
don't want to hurt fish unless I have to. So
Right. Yeah, I feel guilty. And I every time I catch a fish, I tell them to smarten up, grow up, and don't do this again.
well, thank you so much. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you for joining us today.
I have a question, Christine.
Okay.
I understand that you were on the Salmon River last weekend doing something extraordinary.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Rob, thanks for asking. It was oh God, it was one of the best days. It was the best Earth Day I've ever had. So I had the opportunity to go out with a friend of mine who I hope I'm not getting into trouble. She works for Fish and Game. She is Dragon, actually. And she's a fish pathologist. And so we were able to go to the fish hatchery in Stanley, Idaho, and we were able to get out to the spawning shed, which is exactly what it sounds like. And so there they collect the steelhead that have been born in that area. They've migrated to the ocean and they're coming back into the area to spawn again. What Fish and Game does is they collect the hatchery steelhead, and they extract the semen and the eggs from them, and they propagate. I don't know if that's the word for fish, but that's what we do with plants. Next year's batch of baby steelhead and grow them. And the other thing that they do is they take samples of brain cartilage and kidney and spleen to rule out any diseases, because these fish are so closely related. They were born there, they've traveled, they've lived there, they've traveled together. They want to make sure that group of steelhead doesn't carry any diseases and whatnot. And then fortunately, after this has all been done, those fish are issued to the tribes in the area. So they are consumed, which is good. There's no waste. The other thing that comes back up the river are the wild steelhead. And so they separate these, and they take the wild steelhead and they measure them, they weigh them, they take a scale to run DNA on them to see where they came from, and to assure that, or to see from the same area. Measure them, take a scale, do a little clip on their fin. And then what I got to do after all of that was put the steelhead in a bag with lots of water and run 100 yards back to the salmon river and release them. So 6 wild steelhead back into the salmon river this past Monday, and I can tell you releasing the fish was 100 times better than actually catching the fish. So yeah, and Rob asked me what the fish do when you get them back in the river. Do they just sit? Are they stunned? Like, no, they're like bullets. They are just gone. Yeah, they're back home. So that was the best day,
Questions from folks here?
guys.
I have one final
Yeah.
question.
Oh, okay.
And it's the one question that every angler asks.
Oh, boy.
Where's your favorite fishing hole on the Boise River?
Oh, my gosh. We're not supposed to give that out.
I know, but I have to ask.
Yeah, the one that's hot. You know, I don't know.
No, you don't have to answer.
Yeah,
No, don't answer because I want to find it myself.
yes, that's what you have to do. And that's, you know, and that's why we don't ask each other, like, just go out and explore. Because even if you don't catch a fish, you have, you know, you've connected with the river. Maybe you catch a ton of fish that day. Now you've got your secret spot.
What a perfect way to end this
Yeah.
Boise River Riverside chat.